No, thank you so much for having me. This is a really interesting presentation that you're going to listen to today. I'll tell you, when I was in my mid-30s, I had never heard about this thing called emotional intelligence, this EQ, and I didn't realize the mistakes that I was making, right? And so just through trial and error, I got to a place where I kind of figured this out. And I'll talk a little bit more about my story, but you're in for a treat today. We're going to be talking about mindset and really how can you leverage your mindset to foster strong project teams. The year was 2010, and I was going to school at the University of Texas at Austin, and I was doing my MBA. Now, it was an interesting time period because the country was going through the financial crisis. And so just by a show of hands, how many people remember the financial crisis, right? So there was a lot that was going on. People were losing their houses, unfortunately. People were losing value in their 401k. And so it was an interesting time period. But I got lucky. I was able to find a job with Bank of America. And so this required me to move to Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was great. I was working on projects that were helping to move the country forward. Why? Because I was in the home loans division. And so I was seeing it all. And it was rewarding, it was exciting, but it was also a little bit stressful, okay? And after about a year of going through this, and yes, it was rewarding, I did not have any tools on how to manage my mindset. And so other people's stresses became my own, clients' stresses became my own, colleagues' stresses became my own. And so just by a show of hands, I mean, how many people have ever taken in somebody else's stress, right? We've all been there. We've all been there. I didn't have any tools. And because of that, I started to fall into a huge depression. I used to think that other people were mad because of me. I used to think that, oh, that person didn't talk to me today because I must have done something wrong, right? And so there were all these mindset things that were happening. And so eventually I decided to talk to somebody. And it was the very first day, first session, and she said, this was a life coach, and she said, you know what? You need to learn how to manage your mindset, right? You need some tools on how to manage limiting beliefs, on how to own your greatness, right? How to manage stress. And within literally 24 hours, my entire life changed. And I was able to see that, wow, this person's stressed out, that has nothing to do with me, right? And I have this tool now how to set my boundaries as well, right? And so, folks, this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about something that I call a mindset trap, right? A mindset trap. What is this thing called a mindset trap? And then how do you manage it? Because if you can manage it, you become a better version of yourself and you become a stronger project leader, okay? And so that's what we'll be talking about today. These are the two books that inspired this presentation. And so if you're looking for additional resources or book recommendations, these are the books. The first one is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, and then the second one is called Feeling Good by Dr. David D. Burns. So why manage your mindset? So here's a study by the National Science Foundation. We have as many as 50,000 thoughts per day, and the majority of these are negative, as high as 80%. Just by a show of hands, how many people have had a negative thought in the last 3 hours about something? Work, family. There we go, right? And at least 95% of these thoughts are repeated. And so ask yourself, what would happen if maybe I reduced the number of, or the percentage of negative thoughts, maybe from 80%, maybe to 70, maybe to 20, maybe to 10%. How do you think that that would change your life? Your ability to lead project teams. Think about that. And so then, what is emotional intelligence? And so Dr. Godard talked a little bit about this around the self-awareness as part of the SAT assessment, right? Emotional intelligence is very much about self-awareness. How are other people perceiving you? Do you realize how people are perceiving you? Do you understand how people are going to react if you do schedule that 3 p.m. meeting on a Friday, right? And so emotional intelligence is very much about having that self-awareness, having that empathy, as well. Those social skills, that self-regulation, knowing that, you know what, if I'm getting angry, I have this tool on how to bring myself back down, all right? So that's emotional intelligence. And it's interesting because growing up, I never learned about emotional intelligence, this EQ. It was all IQ, IQ, IQ. And both of my parents are retired professors. And in the household, it was always about IQ, learn this, memorize this. But then I got to corporate America and I realized there's something to be said about knowing how to manage your emotions. Because when you're able to master that, you're able to be not only a better version for yourself, but for the people that you lead. And so leadership, Dr. Godard talked about leadership, right? And so when you manage your mindset, you are going to be a stronger leader, right? You're going to be able to understand how the people that you're leading are reacting, and you'll know exactly what you're supposed to do. You can take more control of your career, right? And the higher your EQ, studies have shown that your value goes up, and then guess what also goes up? Your salary, because now you're perceived at a much higher value. You'll have stronger emotional intelligence. You'll develop resilience. I didn't have resilience when I was working at Bank of America. Because yes, I was working on a lot of really great projects and helping a lot of people, but yet I was falling apart because I did not have the tools. I did not have the resilience. I didn't even know what resilience meant, right? You become a better problem solver because you realize that to solve a problem, it's not just about having the knowledge, writing tasks down. It's about also having the emotional intelligence to understand, like Dr. Godard said, how are people going to react to what I am doing or saying or planning, right? And that will also increase your productivity levels. When it comes to stress, your stress will go down. Your stress will absolutely go down because you'll learn how to reframe certain situations so that you understand the situation just a little bit better. It'll improve your health, right? I got really sick. I don't talk about this too much, but I got really sick during that time period because I was always stressed that my body started to reflect those emotions. And then finally, you will cultivate healthier relationships. And that is what this presentation is about. How do you manage your mindset so that you can foster stronger project teams? And so I coined this term, a mindset trap. What is it? A mindset trap is essentially a way of thinking that does not really represent reality. Okay? It's a way of thinking that does not really represent reality. And so some of you might be thinking, what in the world is he talking about? The way I think, it always represents reality. Well, today you might be surprised. And you might realize that, wow, I did not realize that this specific way of thinking was causing me to experience life for what it really isn't. And so as we go through this, I'm going to encourage you to do a couple of things. Number one, I want you to breathe. Because when you start to realize that you're exhibiting some of these mindset traps, you may start feeling guilty, you may start feeling nervous, and realize that every single one of us experiences these things. So that's number one, do not forget to breathe. And number two, give yourself grace. Because we're all on this planet to learn new things. And the more that we learn, the more wisdom that we get, and the more that we can pass that down to other people as well, to our project teams. I'm going to read you this poem. I love this poem. It's called The Cookie Thief, and it's by Valerie Cox. Just by a show of hands, has anybody heard this before? Okay, we have a couple of people. This is one of my favorite poems. And so, relax, sit back. I'm going to read this to you. The Cookie Thief by Valerie Cox. A woman was waiting at an airport one night with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shops, bought a bag of cookies, and found a place to drop. She was engrossed in her book, but happened to see that the man sitting beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag in between, which she tried to ignore to avoid the scene. So she munched the cookies and watched the clock as the gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking if I wasn't so nice, I would blacken his eye. With each cookie she took, he took one too. And when only one was left, she wondered what he would do. With a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and broke it in half. He offered her half as he ate the other. She snatched it from him and thought, oh, brother, this guy has some nerve. And he's also rude. Why didn't he even show any gratitude? She had never known when she had been so galled and sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed to the gate, refusing to look back, that thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane and sank in her seat. Then she thought her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, she gasped with surprise. There was her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. If mine are here, she moaned in despair, the others were his, and he tried to share. Too late, she realized with grief that she was the rude one, the ingrate, the thief. So folks, this is The Cookie Thief by Valerie Cox, and what I love about this story is that this is an example of a mindset trap. You believe that you're seeing reality for what it really is, and then life has a way to surprise all of us and bring us back down, and we realize, no, it's the way that we're thinking that's producing this reality that's not even true, okay? And so it's meant to be funny, but we're gonna go through this. We're gonna go through 5 mindset traps, 5 of them. As we go through each of these, I'll repeat, I want you to breathe in through your nose and out of your mouth because some emotions may come up. It may surprise you. You may realize that you are exhibiting one of these mindset traps, and it's okay. Number 2, give yourself grace because we all go through this. I have exhibited every single one of these, and sometimes I still do. And it's not necessarily about removing these from your everyday life. It's about learning to manage them. And that's the key there. So number 1 is a perfectionist. This is somebody who always feels that everything has to be perfect. Perfect in their eyes. This is our plan. I'm a project leader. This is my plan. And guess what? It's all going to work exactly the way it's supposed to. There's no iteration. Nothing happens. And guess what? That's a recipe for disaster. Because as we know, things happen and we have to iterate. Now, depending on the industry you're in, sometimes it does become a little bit difficult to iterate, right? But when you come into an environment and you immediately assume that everything has to be done this way, you are setting yourself up for failure because life just doesn't work out that way. And so here's some examples of maybe some things that the perfectionist will say. We didn't meet the deadline of the project by 1 week. This project team is incapable. You held a meeting and received some constructive feedback. You feel the meeting was a failure. Oh, it wasn't perfect. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted it to be perfect. You notice that a team member is not great at making presentations. In your mind, you're thinking, oh, he's just incapable. You see, and what happens is that when you start to put yourself in this perfectionist mindset, most likely you will tend to see everybody that way as well. Where if they're not perfect, if they don't meet this level of perfection for you, you'll start looking down upon them. You'll start judging them. You'll start thinking they're inadequate, right? And so if you want to foster strong project teams, you have to think about that. I could tell that people are starting to kind of think through that. Here's a story. This is Beth. So Beth was tasked to hire 10 change managers for a critical initiative at the company. But the problem that Beth is having is that she chooses not to interview anybody if they don't meet 100% of the qualifications in the job posting. In other words, if somebody has, let's say, 85% of the qualifications or 90% or even 95%, it's not good enough for Beth. They have to be perfect. And because she's so stringent upon that, she doesn't hire anybody. And now the company starts to feel it because they really need to staff these critical project roles, okay? And so if you're the perfectionist, give yourself the opportunity to think about how you can be a little bit less stringent because ultimately it is gonna affect the company. So we're gonna go through these 5, and then toward the end, I'll give you some tips on how you can manage all of these. Just by a show of hands, and you don't have to if you don't feel comfortable, but how many of you have found yourself exhibiting this behavior or working for somebody who exhibited this behavior? Okay? So as you can see, and I'm so happy that you're raising your hand, because when you raise your hand, you liberate somebody else. Because that person who didn't feel comfortable raising their hand, they can see, wow, I'm not alone in this. We're all in this together. The second one is called the myopic critic. This is where you do not look at the situation holistically. You only focus on the negative aspects. In other words, all this stuff may be happening. This section here is positive. This might be negative here, but you only look at the negative. Here's a funny example. You get a new hairstyle for the conference. 10 people tell you how much they love it, and one person says they liked it better the way you had it before. And you choose to dwell on that one person's comments, and it might even ruin your experience at the conference because you're so self-conscious about it. That's the myopic critic. Or maybe your boss gives you a stellar review during the performance evaluation, but they mention one minor area for improvement. And now you feel, I feel inadequate. I feel inadequate, right? Because you're only choosing to look at the negative aspect. Or you had several great meetings, but you had an issue with one of them where the technology caused the meeting to pause for 5 minutes. You can't stop thinking about it. I wish that I would have taken care of that. You're only focusing on the negative. And so folks, again, if you're exhibiting this behavior, be careful because you might be getting upset for reasons that you cannot control, and you might be passing that down to your team, okay? So let's look at an example. This is Vanessa. Vanessa's a very hardworking project manager, and she has to give this pretty huge presentation where the ultimate goal is to have her leadership team accept the recommendations. But during the presentation, she gets caught out because the director of quality notices that there's a statistic that she has in there that's incorrect. And she realizes her mistake. She apologizes for it. She says what the right statistic is. But the leadership team accepts her recommendations. Okay, the leadership team accepts her recommendations. However, instead of being happy about the recommendations that are essentially the vision for the next 3 years, she's only focusing on the fact that she had the wrong statistic. Oh, why did they have the wrong statistic? Why did they have the wrong statistic? Why did they have the wrong statistic? Well, guess what? Her leadership team also notices that. And so even though they accepted her recommendations, even though one of her goals is to lead a team, they choose not to give her a team because they are afraid that if she has a team, that she's going to be super, super picky on these professionals. And you see, so it ends up affecting her career. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this okay? And so folks, by show of hands, have you done this before or have you worked for somebody? You see? Do you see? And so it's important to recognize this. Next, we have the pessimist. The pessimist, the person who you're dreading to see because they're always negative. They're always negative. In fact, they're always so negative that they can't ever accept positive criticism. Hey, you did a great job. Oh, it was just luck. It was just luck. And so in this case, another funny example, you get a new hairstyle at the conference, someone tells you they like it, and you immediately assume that they are just saying that to be nice. Oh, they're just saying that to be nice. They're just saying that to be nice. You get promoted to as project team lead, but then you say, you know what? They probably just couldn't find anybody else. They couldn't find anybody else. So your team completed the project ahead of schedule and received praise from the clients. That was just luck. It was just luck. You see, this is the pessimist because if you have the mentality, not only are people a little afraid of your presence, but then you have the ability to potentially lower their value as well. And I still remember I worked really hard on a project, and whoever the leader was, they said, oh, it was just luck. And I thought to myself, I know that I didn't work those extra weekends And this was just luck. One time we did this amazing risk management plan, right? We had all of our risks. We rated the probability of occurrence, the severity level, all of that stuff. We had the mitigation plans. And then the actual risk actually happened. But we had the mitigation plan. The leader instead say, oh, gosh, we're so lucky that there was something in place, because otherwise things would have failed. In other words, she never connected the fact that we actually prepared for that. We prepared for that. That was part of our efforts. And so you have to be careful. You have to be careful. Because if you're thinking that, oh, it was just luck, oh, they just chose me for this reason, not only are you going to limit yourself, but you have the ability to limit your team as well. All right, so this is Luis. Luis is a great project manager as well, but then he also does this. When his team meets these critical milestones, he doesn't give his team praise. So just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, how many people here celebrate small wins within your project in present day? Okay, and why is this important to celebrate small wins, right? Why is this important? Because it keeps the momentum going, right? People feel motivated, creates a certain energy, right? But not Luis. He doesn't celebrate any small achievements. And when his manager congratulates him and his team for the completion of the project, he says, you know what, it was just luck. Well, guess what? Unfortunately, in this case, he was actually asked to step down because he saw that team morale was going down. Okay? And so this is the pessimist. Next, we have the hasty worrier. The hasty worrier. This is somebody who is always worrying. Oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of this. When they do their risk assessment, every single risk has a 100% probability of occurrence. Severity level of 5, the highest. Everything's falling apart. Right? And so your colleagues will get frustrated. It's so funny because I worked for Bank of America, and we went through the financial crisis, right? But there was this risk manager who was like that. And look, I get it. There was things that contributed to this financial crisis, but every single risk was, according to this person, 100% probability of occurrence. And we had to create mitigation plans for everything, even the things that were never going to happen. And it was very stressful, and at the end of the day, the team was starting to suffer because we felt we can't even work on our own roles. This is only one aspect of what we do, right? And so you have to be careful. Now, there obviously is a time, where, worrying is natural for everybody, right? But the key here is worrying without justifiable reason. Worrying without justifiable reason. And so here's an example. Is it moving forward? I think we might be stuck again. I think we might be stuck. Okay, so as we're waiting to get it back up, I'll tell you the next story. So we have this individual who does a presentation for his manager. And the manager, he's kind of quiet during the presentation, not saying much. And so he assumes that the reason his manager is not talking very much, that the reason is because he didn't like the presentation. Okay, that's what he believes. He believes that he didn't like the presentation. I don't think it's still not moving. And so that day, and his name is Mohan, he convinces himself, you know what? Maybe I'm not doing so well on the project. My manager was super quiet. He didn't say anything. He starts to doubt himself, and he starts to go into a downward spiral. In fact, he had a goal of volunteering for this company volunteer event, and he decided not to move forward leading it because he felt that I probably need to focus more of my time on the project. Right? My manager was quiet, therefore that's a reflection on me. Little did he know that the reason his manager was quiet is because his manager had received some bad news that morning, in his personal life. There was an illness. That's the only reason why he was quiet. But Mohan chose to worry about it. And now not only is Mon questioning his adequacy as a project leader, he's also now avoided potentially leading this volunteer group, and it's because he chose to worry without justifiable reason. Okay? And so, folks, this is what happens. And because I am a mindset coach and I work with people all the time, I would tell you that at least 50 to 90% of the time that we think that somebody else is mad at us or something similar to that because they're being quiet or maybe they're being a little bit too direct, 50 to 90% of the time it has nothing to do with us. 50 to 90% of the time it has nothing to do with us. But we jump to these conclusions here and now we make ourselves miserable. This is Jamal. Jamal, this is the risk manager's story that I used to work with. Jamal, every single risk is a disaster. It's a catastrophe. The world's ending. We're going to end up all over the news in a negative way, all right? And so in his case, eventually he was asked to step down as well because the leadership team realized that his inability to stop worrying was slowing down team productivity, team quality, and team morale, okay? And so all of this falls under the hasty worrier. And then finally, number 5. This is number 5. The my way enforcer. Can you guess what this is? The my way enforcer. This basically means that everything has to be done my way. I don't need your feedback. I don't need your opinion. I don't need to ask my team what they think. It's my way or the highway. Okay? So here's an example. My colleagues should have joined the meeting at least 5 minutes early. They do not have meeting etiquette. We are going to be implementing robotic process automation next quarter. That's my final decision. There's no need to consult the team. The message the flight crew provided was wrong. The correct message should have been. You see? Now here's the thing. We all have policies. We all have procedures that outline, that dictate, that guide how we should do maybe a specific process or have a certain conversation. That is different. If it's documented in some type of policy or procedure and there is a specific way that you're supposed to do something, then that's the way you're supposed to do it. But if it's not dictated that way, in a policy or procedure, then you have to give people the ability to do it the way that they can do it best. It doesn't mean that you cannot offer best practices or maybe, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? You know, what do you think about this? Are you aware of this tool that exists? Right? As leaders, we should coach people. But to completely destroy diversity of thought because it has to be your way, that's what we are referring to here. And so this is Estella. She's a senior project manager. She has all of the tasks captured in the project plan. But her expectation is that everyone has to do each of those tasks the way that she wants them, the way that she wants them done. And so when her team completes the task but does it maybe a different way, she gets upset and she says, it should have been done my way. And so she gets feedback. She gets feedback that, you know what, you have to let people express themselves and do things the way that they're able to do it best while still providing some coaching. So just by a show of hands, how many people here have either been Estella or have worked with somebody who said it has to be done this way? And folks, I can remember there was one point where I worked as part of a team of process engineers. There were 30 process engineers, and there was a leader that was leading these 30 process engineers. Every time that his boss said that he wanted to take the team into this direction, he would always say, our manager would always say, okay, we have to do exactly what he says. We have to do exactly what he says. We have to do exactly what he says. And when you have 30 process engineers telling you, okay, this is a huge risk, there's something that he may not be seeing, and you choose not to listen to your team, and he didn't choose to listen to his team. In fact, he yelled at us. Guess what happened 3 months later? The team was performing so low that he lost all 30 process engineers. In other words, the team was taken away from him because he was not able to get feedback and bring it back up. He didn't know how to manage up, okay? And so folks, these are the 5 mindset traps that I've created based on these 2 books that have inspired me, that have made a huge difference in my life. And so I want to hear from you. Okay, I want to hear from you. Let's test your knowledge, right? By going through this, you're more than likely to retain it. Can anybody tell me what the perfectionist is? What is this mindset trap, the perfectionist? Can anybody tell me? Everything has to be perfect. Perfect, this is my vision of perfection. It has to be this way. The myopic critic. What is the myopic critic? I'm sorry, I'm hearing two people out in the back. Exactly. So they only focus on the thing that could have been better, and they completely disregard everything that was great. And you know what's interesting? I know that somebody is exhibiting this behavior as a manager, as a leader, when they only give you feedback when you don't do something that meets a certain standard. They never tell you when you do something well. They never tell you. I'm a firm believer in the start, stop, continue model. They never tell you what to continue doing that you're doing well. It's always what you're not doing well. The pessimist, what is the pessimist? Maybe on this side of the room, what's the pessimist? Anybody in the back? You're always seeing things in the worst possible lights. But the other thing too is that you always feel that even accomplishments, it's not that you necessarily did a great job, but it was just luck, no reason to celebrate. The hasty worrier. What's the hasty worrier? Say it again. So you think that everything's going to go bad, right? So something happens, oh, everything's going to go bad. You know, we need to start worrying. We need to start working nights, weekends, right? The my way enforcer. You become this dictator, right? It's my way is the way it's going to be, and that's it. And so, very good. And so, again, two things. If you catch yourself doing any of these, take a deep breath, because we all do them. And number two, give yourself grace, okay? So now we're going to talk about how do you manage these. Is there a question? We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that. And it's a great question because sometimes we feel that we don't have any control, right? And I was there. I mean, that's part of the reason why I fell into huge depression, because there were times that other people were behaving that way with me, and I felt powerless, right? I felt powerless. And one of the things that life coach told me was, when you do not take control of your own power, you do give it away to everybody else. You do give it away to everybody else. So here's the first technique. The first technique, which is the easiest technique, is to simply be aware that you're doing it. Be aware that you're doing it, and then choose to make a change. And then choose to make a change. Okay? Now that you've heard this, you cannot unlearn this. You know this now. Now you can hold yourself accountable, and you can hold other people accountable too. Okay? It's also about setting your boundaries. I didn't know what it meant to set boundaries because I never grew up hearing that. But yes, to the extent that you feel safe, to the extent that you feel ready, to the extent that you feel compelled to do so, absolutely give feedback to anybody else who might be exhibiting this behavior. And I say that because sometimes some people are not ready to hear it, but sometimes if we don't share this feedback to other people, we're doing them a disservice. In other words, how can they change if we haven't taken the initiative to let them know what we're observing, right? And again, I do say to the extent that you feel safe, because I do recognize that there are some leaders out there that unfortunately are very toxic, okay? And I've been through that as well. The perfectionist, right? The perfectionist behavior. How can you manage the perfectionist behavior? There's two techniques. Number one, if you're exhibiting this behavior, try to identify shades of gray. Try to identify the shades of gray. Does it have to be all of this? Or this, or can it be something in the middle, right? I used to be like this. I used to feel like we have to do it exactly this way, it has to be this way. And then I quickly learned I am stressing out my team. I am stressing out my team because they're feeling overwhelmed that it has to be done to a specific standard. And I once worked with another project manager who basically felt that everything had to be in the same timeline as when we first started the project. And I would say, well, don't you think we need to iterate since we just found out about this new thing in the news? Like this absolutely affects the way that we're going to operate. Like, do we need to take this into consideration? No. This is it. This is. In other words, it had to be his vision of perfect. Another technique is called the double standard technique. This is where if you're unsure if you're exhibiting this behavior, what you can do is you can ask yourself, okay, if this specific colleague, you can pick any colleague, if they were exhibiting this behavior, what would I think about them? Would I think that they're being a little bit too rigid? And if the answer is yes, then most likely other people are going to see you that way as well. And so that's called the double standard technique. Managing hasty worrying. I'm going to give you two different techniques. This is the first one. Be aware of when you're making negative assumptions about something that you do not have evidence about, okay? And so something happens and all of a sudden you start thinking, oh, this manager's mad at me because she didn't acknowledge me during the meeting. I must have done something bad. I'm inadequate. Stick to the facts. When you find yourself doing that, and you will, stick to the facts. Bethany was more quiet today than usual. That's the fact. Bethany was more quiet today than usual. It's not that Bethany was more quiet today than usual because she hated the presentation. Now, in all fairness, she may have hated the presentation. She may have hated it. But until you ask her, you will not know that. And so that's step number 3, show curiosity. Ask questions to evaluate your assumptions. Hi, Priya, I noticed you were short with me yesterday. Did I do something to bother you? See? And then Priya may say, you know what? There was something that you did say that did bother me. I'm glad that we're talking about it. Or Priya may say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that I was being short. Folks, I'm telling you, between 50 to 90% of the time, what we're assuming is real is not. At least 50 to 90% of the time. And then if you're always jumping to the worst case scenario, a great tool to use is that if you catch yourself doing that, jump to the best case scenario. And so I have to give this presentation. I'm feeling nervous. I'm starting to picture myself sweating. My slides are over the place. I'm forgetting where I'm at. Stop yourself. And now picture what is the best case scenario. The best case scenario is that, you know what, people are engaged, they're asking questions, they're smiling, they're happy. Because now you put yourself in a mindset where you can ask, what do I need to do in order to make that happen? What do I need to do to make that happen? And so that's how you use the best case scenario technique. And then finally, for the my way enforcer behavior, recognize that there's more than one way to do something. Recognize that this person, to get from point A to point B, might be a little bit different than how this person gets from point A to point B. And again, it doesn't mean that you can't share best practices, right? It just means that there is a diversity of thought. And if you catch yourself saying, he should have done that, she should have done that, the airline should have done that, the company should have done this, replace the word should with the word could. He could have done this, she could have done this, the airlines could have done this. Because now you put yourself in a position where you can ask, but why didn't they? And now you can have a conversation. And maybe you realize that the way you're looking at things is not the optimal way to do it. Okay? And so that's how you manage the My Way enforcer. So I want you to do the following exercise. Write 1 to 3 things that you are going to do differently to manage any mindset trap that you may have identified with during this session. When you write it down, you're more than likely to make the change. I want you to write down 1 to 3 things that you are going to do differently. Because that's why you're here today. You're here to become stronger project team leaders, stronger leaders, better versions of yourself. What are 1 to 3 things that you are going to do differently? Write down 1 to 3 things that you are going to do differently. And then I have a special offer. If you feel comfortable sharing what that is that you're going to do differently, and yes, I understand that this requires you to be vulnerable, but if you choose to share that, maybe the first person who speaks here and the first person who speaks here, I will give you a free 30-minute complimentary one-on-one coaching session. But you have to come over here first. First person here and first person here. If you're willing to say what you're going to do differently. Okay, we have our 2 people. Here they are. Okay, tell us what you're going to do differently.
So I never had a word for it, but I am one of those myopic
The myopic critic.
And I do realize where that comes from. My father tended to not be someone who would ever give positive feedback or enforcement, and it was always like what you're not doing well or right. And I see myself doing that as an adult, and I know that it impacts my team. And what I want to do is I want to work myself out of that behavior. So my intention moving forward is to identify things that everyone is doing well, like consciously do that, but also acknowledge them. Right? So it's one thing to say it to yourself, but it's another to also present it to that person and say, I've seen this from you, and I appreciate that. So that's what I will be doing moving forward.
Thank you. Give her a hand. And I love hearing that, because that's what this is about. This is about how can we become better versions of ourselves so that we can become better leaders and have our team become a better version of itself as well.
So I wrote down 3 things, but I think they kind of wrap up to something, like being a better version of myself. I think that's what it wraps up to. So I tend to focus on the worst case scenario. I'm a mother of 5. I have teenagers. So like last night, one of my sons just moved to Dallas, would not answer his phone. So immediately, what's the thought? He's dead, right? And, I'm like panic. I'm like, I'm going to call the cops. Like, something happened. I had to remind myself that, no, he's probably tired. He's probably sleeping. It's 11:30. So, yeah, I need to stop worrying about the worst case scenario. It's hard, but I need to work on it. The other thing is, I need to stop worrying about how I can make something better. Like, I can't fix everybody's problems. Everybody's responsible for their own selves, right? I can worry about what I can do better, but I need to stop worrying about how I can perfect, like how can my team perfect everything? Like, I think I need to let go of that. And then, stop focusing on the negative comments. Can I tell a little story?
Sure.
Okay. So I work for Indeed, and our CEO is a super nice guy. His name is Chris Himes, and very, very friendly. Right? So Chris and I run into the elevator many, many times, and we have conversations. Chris and I meet up at a happy hour, and, he's just starting small chat with me. And I just sat there, and I gave him all these random facts about what's going on in my life. He didn't care to know. I just sat there, and I had verbal diarrhea, and I kept talking, okay, like for 15 minutes. And Chris is so nice. He's just like, okay, all right, just trying to be polite. And then finally, 15 minutes into this conversation, he's like, okay, it was nice seeing you. I'll talk to you later. I need to like mingle with other people. I'm like, yeah, sure. Oh my God. I beat up myself for that incident for months. I'm like, I never want to see Chris Himes ever again. Like, I'm like, he's going to remember who I am, and he's going to remember that incident, and that's it, I'm done. Oh my God. So that was me just worrying about something that Chris probably didn't even remember. I did run into him just this week in the elevator, and he was very nice to me. So I'm hoping he forgot. But that story just came right back to me because I'm like, oh my God, that's embarrassing. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for listening.
No, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. And find me for after this, and I'll give you my information so we can have a coaching session. All right, very good. I want to end the presentation before we get into a few more Q&A with this poem. I found this poem, and I just thought, wow, this is such a cool poem. And so I want to share it with you because it's called a reverse poem. So when you read it from top to bottom, it demonstrates a mentality, a mindset of somebody who's maybe a little bit more on the negative side, somebody who reflects these mindset traps. But then when you read it from the bottom to top, it reflects somebody who has actually done the work to understand the powerful outcomes of managing your mindset. And so it's supposed to be a metaphor for us in the way that we see situations. Because remember, a mindset trap is something that we see, that we think is real, and it really isn't. And it's causing us to feel resentment, frustration, anger, sadness, anxiety, right? So this is supposed to be a metaphor. I'm going to read it to you right now. I Choose to Think Differently by Kevin Snyder. My thinking can never be changed, so stop trying to tell me that things can be different and hope always prevails. Because at the end of the day, it's too much of a negative and divisive world. So I'm not going to lie to you or myself by saying there is hope for a better future. I believe that I am incapable of making a real difference, and nothing you say will persuade me. I have made too many mistakes in the past. I just don't believe the nonsense that the past struggles have developed strength. Because when I look in the mirror, can the future really be any different? Can the future really be any different? Because when I look in the mirror, my past struggles have developed strength. I just don't believe the nonsense that I have made too many mistakes in the past. And nothing you say will persuade me that I am incapable of making a real difference. I believe there is hope for a better future. So I'm not going to lie to you or myself by saying it's too much of a negative and divisive world. Because at the end of the day, things can be different and hope always prevails. So stop trying to tell me that my thinking can never be changed. So folks, think about this poem and think about this. You may have the exact same situation. Depending on how you look at it, may determine what is actually real, what your mood is, and then how you lead other people so that way they can become the better version of themselves as well. So thank you so much. So I think we have a couple more minutes to take some more questions. I don't want to keep you from lunch, but I absolutely want to answer any other questions that folks may have. Does anybody have also online, I think we have people online. Does anybody have any question online? I choose to think differently. Yep.
Hey, on your 5 models, where do you fit that?
You know what? I put that in the pessimist. You know, this is somebody
Could
who...
you please repeat the question for the people
Oh,
on
yes,
Zoom?
yes. The question
Could you please
is...
come up here if you're asking question? Thank you so much.
So the question is, where do you categorize the person who's more apathetic, they're just being lazy? I tend to put them more under the pessimist, just because, you know, it's kind of like they're being, you know, lackadaisical about things. And it definitely should be addressed, right? Because somebody who brings in that energy, now all of a sudden everyone is starting to feel really lethargic and especially if that's the leader, right? They're starting to feel like, you know, I don't have a sense of drive either. And so we have to be careful. with that. If that answers your question. Yep. Any other questions?
I find that I am a little bit of all of the mindsets. So is there another mindset that incorporates all five? And have you ever heard of that before? I mean, I'm the youngest child, so I'm thinking maybe that has something to do with it.
You know, it's so funny because
But-
sometimes like somebody tells me, oh, you know, I'm going to go to therapy after this workshop you led. Here's the thing. Again, we have to give ourselves grace because it's not necessarily about removing these thinking patterns. It's about managing them. Now, some of these might be rooted in maybe some traumatic experiences, and therapy might be warranted, right? But it's about learning how to become a better version of ourselves. And so this is a framework, right? This is a framework. I mean, we can create different frameworks for this. And so I would just encourage you to think about these actual behaviors, and if you feel ready to do so and compelled to do so to make a change, then go for it. You know, that's simply how I would do it. But give yourself grace, because I used to do every single one of these.
Yeah.
I used to do all of these. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Hello. While we're all working on ourselves, some of us have members on our team that we recognize these attributes, and I think the one that's most triggering for me is the My Way enforcer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips on coaching someone on your team through their struggles with being a My Way enforcer?
Sure. So if there's somebody that you're leading, right, there's nothing wrong with giving feedback, right? As part of project management, we have this coaching aspect, and it's okay to set those boundaries. Your company is depending on you to do that, right? And then when you do not do that, you're not allowing that person to become a better version of themselves either. A couple of things to take into consideration. It's obviously easier said than done because you may have somebody who may be the pessimist all the time, right? And they might have things that they're going through. They may need therapy, right? Dr. Godard was mentioning earlier that you don't know why somebody may not want to shake your hand. You don't know their story, right? You don't know that. And so when you come into that conversation, come to the conversation without judgment. Because at the end of the day, it still doesn't mean that you can't set your own boundaries. You absolutely have every right to set your boundaries. In other words, somebody else's story should not be the reason why your story cannot become the best version of what it can become. So set the boundary. And then if there's somebody who's not listening, who's not wanting to change, and you really need them to for the success of this project, you may have to escalate to their manager, right? You may have to have that conversation. I still remember the day that I told somebody that for the very first time. And this was the business lead, and for some reason, they kept ending meetings like 5 to 10 minutes late. And I kept thinking, wow, like people are getting irritated because they have to go to the next meeting, and this person kept talking, and finally I told the person, I'm like, hey, look, I just want to let you know that. And this person got really upset, and finally I just said, look, I'm setting my boundaries with you. This is what I need from you. And when you set your boundary with somebody, there's something so powerful about that because they realize that that is what you expect. And so that's my advice to you on how to deal with somebody who's maybe the My Way enforcer, but it can equally be used with all of these mindset traps.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I think now we have to go to lunch. I'll be here during lunch if you have any more questions, but again, all of this here is about becoming a better version of yourself. If you have any questions, here's my email. This is my LinkedIn QR code. I do post about 3 to 4 times a week, different mindset topics. And so feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Would love to have you as a connection. And if you have any questions, you can either message me through email or through LinkedIn as well. But just remember, mindset is critical. We learn so much about IQ, and there's something to be said about EQ. And I was talking to Dr. Godard earlier today about even the adaptability quotient, right? Your AQ, your ability to embrace change. So there's a lot to learn, and this is really the first step. So thank you so much.